So, one thing you said, which I really connected with, was this concept of discovery learning, because scientists do that all the time. We try not to call them failed experiments. We try to call them, well, we've just learned what doesn't work, so let's figure out what works. So that seems to be a core component of your experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, my first boss in life said to me, when are we going to stop learning and when are we going to start making money? But yeah, definitely everything.
I say that to people in my laboratory. When are we going to, those papers that we're writing,
That's
right?
right.
When Vicki told me you were our very special guest and you'd written books, and so I went and I looked, and so there were two books that I saw, The Essentials of Cave Diving. I skipped right over that one.
Right.
And then there's the book Into the Planet. And there's some folks who know me here, so I read a lot of science, and my capacity for reading nonfiction or fiction is pretty limited. But I read this book, and it brought joy and anxiety and all sorts of emotions to me. And what I want to start with is what you wrote about in the beginning of the book, which is your childhood.
Yes.
And when you talk about children growing up in an environment of relationships and how important they are in sort of establishing the foundation for their healthy development and understanding themselves and what drives them. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because it was quite palpable when I read it in terms of your relationships, your family, the kinds of activities that you did as a child in Canada. That seemed to have a big impact on you.
I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, but I also, grew up with toys that didn't have some predestined learning with them. So I, had Lego and erector sets, and then craft supplies, and a lot of toys that required imagination. And my parents definitely encouraged me to be curious. I was the daughter of an engineer and an English teacher. And so if I had a question, the answer wasn't necessarily delivered to me. I was asked to look it up. And, look it up in the encyclopedia or the dictionary that lived on the back of the toilet in the house. Yeah.
That sounds familiar. I had the same thing in my household growing up. So you talked about not running away from fear, but in some sense embracing it, recognizing it. You're not. You take risks, but you're not but that's not the central component of what drives you. There was a part of the book early on as well in which there was a really terrible experience in terms of home invasion, and you spend some time writing about that. So my guess is that the length of time you spend on a particular component of your life was probably very important in terms of some life decisions that you were making.
Yeah, it was a very pivotal point in my life. I fought off a burglar in my home as a girl in university, and I'll be honest that my first response when I knew there was an intruder in the house was to, curl up under the blankets in the fetal position and want to hide. I was forced into having to deal with this ultimate terror and having to defend myself. And when I walked away from that experience, it was filled with the expected PTSD that comes with these sorts of experiences. And I carried that around for a long time until someone said to me, you can't change what happened. What you can change is what you do with that experience in your life. And literally, it was a friend of mine who said, I've heard this story enough, like, get over it, basically. And I will now look back on that experience as perhaps a gift in life, something that taught me how to deal with fear. And yes, it still does replay in my head from time to time, but in a more positive way. I now know that I am capable of survival and willing to survive the worst. And that's why I say you have to learn to deal with fear, because each time a terrifying thing has happened in my life, I got better at it.
One of the things that you described in your talk, and also it is a theme throughout the book, is both the attention and awareness that you have in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. And I found, initially when I read that you got your degree in graphic arts and you were developing a successful business, and then you made this transition, I wondered, well, what's going on there? what's the deal with that? And particularly as we're transitioning to, I'm just going to throw everything away and go to the Caymans and start to dive. But there was something, as I read further in the book, there was something about your accomplishments and your training as a graphic artist, and maybe it's, you know, some of the in your engineer components of your genes that you inherited, gives you a spatial perspective that I just felt, man, if you don't have that, how could you do what you do?
You know, it's interesting. When I look back on my education, it is those soft skills that I learned that were so critical to what I do today. But when I think back about trying to find, what am I going to study in university? I was at the top of my class. I could do anything I wanted. I had scholarship opportunities, but there wasn't a path that fit. There wasn't an educational construct that fit what I wanted to do in so many different areas. And maybe that's a challenge that we have going forward, is preparing a better, you know, educational opportunity for people today, because the world of tomorrow is going to have a lot more people that need skills like mine to create a hybrid career rather than working in one path for one person for the rest of their life.
And the intriguing thing about it is that the skill set that you clearly developed over time from childhood on was translatable into probably other choices or options that you would have had, but you ended up choosing, you know, trying to slither into a space that only a small animal could slither into. That was really quite. I mean, that's when my heart started to race, literally, as I was reading, and particularly. There was a long chapter about the dives in Mexico and the caves there, and what I defined initially, I said this to you yesterday, but I didn't mean to offend you. I said, "Boy, you're really obsessive compulsive." But you then said,
Yeah, no, I have to be. I have to be dedicated to safety protocols and follow through on all of those. But
the mapping.
Yeah, the mapping is a big part of what I do.
Why don't you describe that for the audience, because it's crazy.
I mean, traditionally we would map by by running a nylon guideline through the cave system and using a compass and drawing sketches and measuring the compass bearings and distances. Well, today we're actually driving three-dimensional mapping devices through these cave systems, mapping devices that are now headed for Jupiter's moon Europa. So it's amazing the doors that can open. But really the cave diving part of it is just the environment that I wanted to work in. I wanted to be underwater, and I wanted to apply my skills and academic background to that environment. But you could be someone working in an underwater environment as a writer, as a photographer, as a film producer, as a speaker, as a trainer, as a test pilot, all of these things. And so I'm sort of encouraging kids today to say, where do you want to be? Like, I didn't want to be inside the four walls of my ad agency that I created. I wanted to be outdoors. So where do you want to be? And then how can you apply your multiple literacies to work in that environment?
There was something also that you described, and it was subtle. I don't know if I don't think it was overt, but you had, you know, great relationships with your partners and others who were in the graphic design business, but it just seemed to me there was something about the relationships, the social engagement, the relationship, and you described at the end how important those are about this community. So what's unique about that community?
You know, the community within the realm of cave diving is everything from engineering to artists, and so it's incredibly diverse, and I think that's what I love. I love the collaborations. I work with different scientists, you know, on a day-to-day and expedition-to-expedition basis, and that open collaboration of left brain, right brain, and the freedom to explore is what I find most compelling in my colleagues. Yeah.
So I have one last question. So I took scuba a while ago, and we went down a few times, 3 or 4 times during that week, and I went down about a whopping 35 feet, and I was fine for the first, 5 or 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden, I just couldn't control my emotions anymore. Does that happen, I mean, to your colleagues who you're diving with, or to others, where they find themselves, you know, have great emotional control, but then under certain circumstances just kind of...
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's, you know, sometimes it's negative, the anxiety. Sometimes it's positive. People are moved to tears from the beauty or an encounter with wildlife. It can be incredibly emotional. And then they're also potentially exposed to anxiety from carbon dioxide buildup, in which case they cannot overcome the physical anxiety that brings. And that's why I say it takes practice, and it takes training and slow progressive steps to move towards, you know, the ultimate expression of what you want to do.
And the willingness to be a discovery learner.
Yes,
Right.
explorer's mindset.
All right. It's been great talking to you. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.